1961, Blythe, England. A governess plays hide and seek with her 2 children. As the children begin to count, she runs delightedly down the spiral staircase and hides behind the curtain. But she catches something at the corner of her eye, something moving, something coming towards her. The governess turns towards the window and gasps as she sees a man approach her, staring right back at her. A man who's been dead for several years. Up until the late 1950s, ghost movies had been fun for all the family, farcical comedies or spooky tongue-in-cheek thrill rides. But in the early 60s, horror cinema was changing, maturing. After movies like Psycho, it became clear that adults were yearning for something more mature, something more psychological. And with that came 2 of the first mainstream ghost movies made exclusively for grown-ups. Ones that dealt with perception, trauma, sexuality and psychology as much as they did ghosts and ghouls. Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of the ghost story and delve into 2 haunted house classics, Jack Clayton's The Innocence and Robert Wise's The Haunting.
Whose hand was I holding?
Welcome back to the Evolution of Horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're joining us for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres across a number of weeks. We're currently in the midst of exploring the evolution of the ghost story, and this is part 3, in which we're delving into 2 of the best and 2 of my favourite haunted house movies of all time, The Innocence and The Haunting. Very, very exciting. So as you can imagine, there's a lot to discuss and a lot to get through this week. But before we get started, here's a few quick details on how you can get in touch with us. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter @evolutionpod or on Facebook. That's facebook.com/evolutionofhorror. And you can find more of our episodes if you subscribe on iTunes or whatever podcast platform you use. There you can find 14 episodes delving into the evolution of the slasher and the first 2 episodes delving into the evolution of the ghost story. So let's get started. This is where things get serious. So to join me to discuss these 2 absolute classics, I've got a very special guest. This person is a horror movie producer, and she's produced some of the best and most innovative and original indie horror movies over the last few years, including the incredible found footage movie The Borderlands and Alice Lowe's brilliant directorial debut from last year, one that she made whilst 8 months pregnant, Prevenge. It is my great pleasure to welcome to the podcast the brilliant Jen Handorf. Jen, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you so much for being here in my lovely little sort of broom cupboard room at the BFI.
In the annals of the BFI.
Where there is like, have you noticed already, there's like, it's like a signal dead zone. It's like there's no contact with the outside world in this building.
I want to move in. If I was in an unreachable alcove in the BFI for the rest of my life, I think that would literally be some manner of fantasy for me.
Yeah, so it's brilliant. I love that they've got a signed poster here by Liam Neeson of Taken, and it's like they obviously didn't want to display that pride of place downstairs or anything. They've hidden it away in the cupboard.
It's just it's a point of interest.
Yeah, it's like, where can we put this?
And then of course Topsy Turvy is on the other wall.
That's very BFI.
That one. It's next to Taken. It's a genre mashup.
Exactly. Yeah, love it. So just first of all, for people who don't know you, Jen, tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay, so Jen Handorf, and I'm an independent producer. So I produce predominantly feature films. I still do a lot of shorts because at the end of the day, I'd rather be making something than not making something. But I work predominantly in the genre arena, which, for the layperson means mostly like horror, thriller, sci-fi, awesome. This kind of area. I've just wrapped on my 13th feature, which is very exciting.
So cool.
Oh, I'm so tired.
Yeah, you must be absolutely exhausted. And also, so very exciting for genre fans such as myself, because you've done, recently you've produced Prevenge, Alice Lowe's Prevenge, which was a huge hit. Everyone loved it to pieces.
It was really something to be proud of, I think. And even regardless of the quality of the film, I just think the notion of having had an 8-month old pregnant director. But my real hope is that somewhere down the line, another woman is able to point to this film and say, yes, I can do it.
Yeah.
Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend, it's not a doctor's recommendation to go 8 months pregnant into film. But, if somebody's just found out they're pregnant and they think, oh my God, what if I have to cancel my film because I'll be 2 months pregnant at the start of it?
Yeah.
You don't
Absolutely.
it's not, there's nothing to keep a woman from making these films, and that was one of the things I was most proud of, aside obviously from the incredible elements of the film itself. But it was a wonderful one to be a part of.
Yeah, good for her as well. I mean, I got to chat to her for the BBC, and she said that that this opportunity just arose at this point in her life, and she was like, I can't turn it down, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think from the time she got the phone call, it was about a month until we were shooting, which meant that
crazy.
I think I got the script like 2 weeks into that. So I had 2 weeks to prep a film for a 9-day shoot and no money. So.
And I remember her saying as well, because the film is it's very kind of linear, isn't it? This kind of like it's set piece after set piece of her sort of murdering her way through people, essentially. And she said that was partly for practical reasons and kind of the good, easy way to kind of, you get one actor in for a day, you shoot their scene,
the bitterness,
shoot their set piece.
It's sort of, and it's a good strategy really for all filmmakers starting out, is that if they can keep their scenes contained, whether that's, God, you only have to look at my track record to know these are words I live by, but something like Devil's Business, which was 3 actors in one building for the entire film, or something like The Borderlands, where it's 3 actors across several locations, but then the secondary characters they only interact with at specific locations. There's ways you can be practical to make your film more achievable without having to take away from the narrative or the production value, and that's certainly one of them.
It's great, and these are the best movies throughout history. I think are these kind of ones where you find out, they were made on micro budgets and they kind of had to work around the budget. Sometimes that feeds the creativity more, doesn't it? That's the thing.
And famous last words, but I genuinely really enjoy, maybe in hindsight, I'm not sure I always enjoy them at the time, but I genuinely enjoy those films because of that element, because you have to be creative. I've done bigger films obviously as well. I've done films of sort of like £2 million budget range. Yeah. And the thing you find with those are that people just tend to throw money at the problem rather than trying to find a creative solution.
Right.
And so what you end up with is a very expensive, poor solution rather than a very clever, cheap solution.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely something I would recommend to all filmmakers coming into it, is finding ways to segment those scripts up, just to make them more achievable, really.
Absolutely. And can I just say, I mean, we are at the moment talking about ghost stories over the next few weeks. The Borderlands is one of the creepiest movies I've seen in my sort of adult life. I absolutely loved it.
Thank you.
Here's the crucifix. Must cross-check crucifix against video footage.
Deacon, what we saw up there was not normal. Was not normal.
And I really think the sound design has a lot to answer for in that film, which actually, talking about the films we're talking about today, sound design is such a huge element. And it's Martin Pavey, very lucky to have Martin Pavey as our sound designer. Martin's done a lot of incredible films. He did Prevenge as well. And it's with the Borderlands, I think we were really lucky that between a fantastic cast, fantastic sound design, and really creepy locations between the church and the caves.
It's that church. Oh my god.
I have to tell you the story. One of my favorite assistants is this guy Lee, who actually winds up cameoing in most of my films because he's a good sport. But Lee was being a very tricksy monkey one particular evening, and he was in the van, and he had the van started up, and he says, "Oh, sorry, I think I left this back in the church. Do you mind grabbing it for me?" And it's pitch black, like we're in the middle of the Devon countryside. There's nothing around.
Yeah.
There is a monastery where loads of people have taken a vow of silence about half a mile down the road. So occasionally you would have these creepy figures appearing, talking to you or responding to you. So that was terrifying. But so I pluck up my courage and wander back into the church, and again I'm weaving through gravestones. Like this is not like your friendly C of E sort of local parish. This is a creepy church on a hill in the middle of nowhere. And as I'm walking back into the church, I go to open the door, and this two of him and one of the other crew members had set up that they were going to scare the bejesus out of me, with one of them on the inside and one of them creeping right behind me. So I open the door and one on the inside, wah, and I just about lose it. And then just as I've just about caught my breath again, Lee comes up behind me, wah! And so I'm just like, my nerves are totally frayed. I'm just like, I need a strong drink to get through the, you pricks. I mean, well done you, but you guys are
but
terrible.
Fuck you.
Exactly. Do that again. And you're saying no, obviously not. No, but it was, I mean, they are intrinsically frightening locations. And I think, for instance, one of the films we're talking about today, The Innocence, I got to watch that a couple years ago in a church down in Camberwell.
Perfect.
And it was the most incredible experience because the church, you could hear the organ pipes creaking and just the environment added so much to the film.
Churches are just inherently creepy, aren't they?
They are, right?
Yeah, but it's one of, there are so many of those kind of found footage films, I think, that it's hard to sometimes for people that don't know or get recommendations, separate the good ones from the bad ones. But Borderlands is really up there. It's one of the best ones.
Yeah, and I think because if you don't approach it creatively, it's a really easy easy film to make.
That's it,
because
isn't it? I'm sure a lot of people think, I could do that. Yeah.
Exactly. Your characters are the camera operators. So you think, we don't need lights, we don't need this, we don't need that.
Yeah.
But honest to God, on the Borderlands, like our poor DOP and actors, they were literally belted together. Their belts were looped together so that the camera could stay on he was operating the camera so it could stay on their shoulders.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think as long as you're clever about it, it's a really interesting medium to work in because it can be so realistic. And it's also, again, talking about sound design, things can be happening around the characters that they don't look at. Whereas in a traditionally photographed film, you would expect the camera to cut to even an empty shot where the sounds came from.
Absolutely.
But when it's the character's POV, you're so in their head and you're so in their vision that kind of limited information is obviously, it's good for upping the ante.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Okay, so, I mean, obviously, it sounds as though, given what you do, you're a big fan of the horror genre. I am. And it's I'll be honest too, it's not just of the horror genre within film, like horror literature, and even just the science of fear.
Before I got my film degree, I was studying psychology and just the way that our brains process fear and the uncanny. And there's been some great books about just what it means to be frightening.
Yes.
And so that's really always fascinated me, even more than just, either films or books on its own, just the science of fear.
Absolutely.
So, but yeah, with horror films, gosh, I came to it rather late, I was not sort of a gore hound at a young age. My parents are sort of quote straight as far as genre goes. They're much more into their sort of hurt lockers at the cinema rather than any sort of more genre film.
Yeah.
But I think it came to me in pieces as a kid. Things like, I remember my brother, my older brother, was stuck babysitting me once, and he wanted to watch Killer Clowns from Outer Space, and so I had to watch Killer Clowns from Outer Space.
Yeah.
And so I hate clowns. Now,
as we will do, of course.
And I'll be honest, I know it sounds lame, but I think Killer Clowns is probably the most frightening movie to me because I still can't watch it. And I think that's something for people about horror films. It's all about context.
Yes, it is.
It's
absolutely.
How did you watch it? Where did you watch it? Who did you watch it with? At what point in your life did you watch it? And I think that context really brings a lot of the fear because it is so personal for the audience. So, when I'm hanging out with my gorehound friends and we're all talking about the scariest movie we've ever watched, and I was sitting there going, Killer Clowns from Outer Space. And it's sort of, like crickets in the room.
But when you're young, that is terrifying.
Oh my God. Yeah. And honestly, I think I must have been like 6 or 7 as well. So I was like, and for 6 or 7, I think genuinely, my mom tried to make me have a clown birthday party a couple years later. And this is in the 80s. So this is like, so it was all the thing to do.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I think I just burst out into tears at the very mention of it. But yeah, it's that context means so much. And really, it wasn't until even my teens, like I'd say teens, like preteen, like 11, 12, my parents were watching Silence of the Lambs in the basement, and I was supposed to be in bed, and I was peeking through the banister because the TV was across the basement from the stairwell, so I was peeking through the banister. They didn't know I was there watching Silence of the Lambs through the banister. I was too terrified to go to bed, but I loved it.
Yes.
I loved the character and how evil he was
Yeah.
and how much I wanted Clarice to survive and do well, but at the same time I wanted to see what was going to happen to her.
Yeah, it's that weird, like you say, it's that odd psychology of, we kind of don't want to watch it, but we do at the same time. It is fascinating.
Exactly. And again, context. I was meant to be in bed. It was sort of forbidden that I was there watching it, and that was that increases the excitement and the adrenaline and all of this.
Totally.
But yeah, I think just the context is so very important.
Yeah,
to
I
those
think you're right,
experiences.
actually. And it's interesting because I've been talking with other people about this. We've just covered sort of all of the sort of slasher subgenre, and I think those movies in particular are great to watch with friends, with like fellow kind of gorehounds. Great to watch in audiences at places like Fright Fest, that kind of thing. Crowd-pleasing horror movies. There's something about these movies though, like The Innocence, these kind of ghost movies that get to me more watching them just at home alone. There is something about these ghost movies. In
Well,
particular.
and there's that sort of tradition of, especially in the UK, of that sort of BBC or Hammer horror Christmas movie. It's that time of the year. But also, you're alone watching it on television. You're under your couch with your cocoa, and there's no one else around, and the trees are scratching on the window behind you. And you're absolutely right. The silence of them and the potency really comes from that loneliness to some extent.
Yeah, absolutely. What are your general thoughts on these types of horror movies? These kind of, because again, we were kind of having a discussion about these, as opposed to the slashers, which are generally considered by a lot of non-genre fans, I suppose, kind of the trashier end of horror. Whereas these are often thought of as the more esteemed end of horror, films like The Innocence and The Haunting.
They are now, because if you but if you look back when they originally came out, they were trash.
Yes.
So when The Innocence came out, it was a B movie.
Yeah.
It was not considered to be, high cinema in any way, shape, or form. Aside from, and I love this, it's based on The Turn of the Screw.
Yeah.
Which, because I've got a weird background, I'd actually seen as an opera when I was about 8 or 9 years old.
Oh, wow.
So I'd seen Turn of the Screw before I'd ever even come across The Innocence, which wasn't until my late teens. But so it's an interesting juxtaposition, The Innocence, I think, because it's based on opera, which is obviously considered high art or opera or a play. But then the genre itself was considered quite trashy. And if you look at the director's work previous to The Innocence, his work is very much B movie type stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And it's he actually as well. And I'm fumbling around trying to remember his name because it's not.
Oh, it's Jack Clayton.
There you go, Jack Clayton. That's perfect. So Jack Clayton, he actually later directed another film called Something Wicked This Way Comes.
Yes.
Which I did watch as a child, and if you'll forgive my language, shat me right up. But it's kind of interesting because he came from this B movie background, and so to make a film which we now consider sort of high genre filmmaking, and even again, if you look at Something Wicked This Way Comes, it's the same sort of really well wrought, frightening material. But yeah, for me, I think it's difficult, the sort of burden of genre film within the context of all cinema, because I think to some extent we will always be the redheaded stepchild of the film world, because we're not high drama, and it's but when in fact I think it's a really unfair assessment, because it's genre films are able to connect with an international audience in a way that films like dramas or action films can't really, because fear is universal.
Yeah.
Everyone has something that frightens them, and a lot of people share what frightens them.
Yeah.
There's somebody in Japan who's going to be just as scared of The Innocence as we are here. It doesn't really have a cultural boundary in the same way that other genres do.
Yeah.
So in that sense, you're really able to connect with your audience in a much more powerful way, or a much more personal way. And really, I think if I had to put forward a guess, I think the reason horror's gotten such a bad rap is because you can connect with your audience so personally. It almost feels like a cheat.
Yeah.
Like it almost feels like, oh, well, of course you can upset them by throwing something visceral on the screen.
Yeah.
But within, obviously, as you well know, and I'm sure your audience well knows, within the horror community, we have those same sort of levels of appeal where, torture porn. Okay, so mostly people are fairly dismissive of torture porn, which I'll be honest, I am as well.
Yeah.
Because it is fairly, quote, cheap. to just throw a load of blood and sex and boobs and whatever else and go, scary.
Yeah.
But to
100%.
make something like a ghost story where you're not using the shortcuts of blood and guts and you're using tone and sound and performance and
Absolutely.
and it takes real control to get the most out of that. And I think, when we look at films like The Innocence, like The Haunting, it's great to see how that's something that hasn't changed over the years. That's still frightening. They've got a really long shelf life.
Oh, yeah.
These films that can be scary based on those levels.
These two movies in particular, I feel like they will never date. They will never age. It's just perfect. So last week I was talking with Michael Blythe about how sort of the ghost stories that came before this and sort of early cinema and up to the 60s, majority were kind of more comedic in a way. Films like The Uninvited, or even Blythe Spirit and these kind of farcical
Abbott and Costello
ghosts.
meet Frankenstein, etc.
Exactly. Or they were ghost stories that turned out not to have ghosts. These kind of Scooby-Doo endings, or movies like William Castle ones, like House on Haunted Hill.
Yeah.
A little bit more campy and that kind of thing. These two movies that we're going to talk about today, I think it's like this. It feels like this was a changing point where it was like these were, and actually I think in the trailer for The Innocence, it even sort of markets it as this is a ghost story for grown-ups.
Adults, exactly. Yeah. And it's a change in tone, I think. And it was I think something else that's interesting about these films from a production side is these films were a risk.
Yeah.
And they were both B movies to some extent, but it's still, even though they're lower budgets and easier to make and this kind of thing, somebody still had to say, yeah, we're gonna try this.
Yeah.
We're gonna try and make a ghost story that's scary for adults. And I think they nailed it. They
absolutely did. Yeah.
There has never been a ghost story created especially for the adult moviegoer until The Innocence.
Do they ever return to possess the living?
20th Century Fox, which presented Deborah Carr in Heaven Knows Mr. Allison, and such outstanding motion picture immortals as Snake Pit, Gentleman's Agreement, and Peyton Place, now gives you The Innocence. Based on the Henry James chiller of macabre evil. Brilliantly adapted for the screen by William Archibald and Truman Capote.
Do they ever return to possess the living?
You can see. You must.
The Innocence, produced and directed by Jack Clayton, the man who directed Room at the Top, turned into fearful reality by the magnificent performance of Miss Deborah Carr, with Michael Redgrave as the uncle, co-starring Peter Wingard, Meggs Jenkins.
I saw him staring. Who, miss? The same man, the man on the tower. The tower? But now, just now, he was staring past me into the house as if he were hunting someone. What's he like, miss? Oh, he had dark, curling hair and the hardest, the coldest eyes. Is he?
So let's do it then. Let's talk about The Innocence. I mean, first of all, just as ever, we go sort of full spoiler with these reviews.
Fair
so
enough.
We
I mean, they've been out for a while now.
Exactly,
so I sort of
exactly.
think
So
the
it's
time to run to the cinema has passed.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this and you haven't seen The Innocence or The Haunting, please do yourself a favour and go and watch them because they are incredible movies, I think. What are your thoughts generally on The Innocence? Are you a fan?
I love it. So I have to start. I love both these films.
Yeah.
I have been a long time fan of this kind of film that, as I say, is really creative with its solutions.
Yeah.
It's really subtle with its fear. And it really focuses on the experience of the characters. Something I love about The Innocence is just the quiet looks. There's you could strip most of the dialogue out of The Innocence and still have a film that's as scary as it is, and I think that shows a real craftsmanship on the part of the filmmakers.
Yeah.
But there's frequently, this governess goes to this house and it's all a bit weird, and she's had a bit of a kerfuffle in her past, but it's going to be fine. And she gets there and it's uncanny. And that's one of my favorite things, uncanny. So there's one thing that's off. You can't put your finger on it, but there's something that's off. And it's that uncanniness that drives her upset and her suspicion and her paranoia throughout. Obviously, it builds and builds until we find out why it was uncanny, and it gets properly frightening when you find out that there's real presence of supernatural danger here.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's these quiet shots of the lake and the marshes next to the house, and then suddenly there's this figure of a black woman.
That is the scariest image in the film
freaky,
for me.
right?
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, so my absolute scariest moment for me is just after that, when the governess turns to the little boy and asks him if he saw anything, and his blatant, you can tell in the character's face, you can tell in the child actor's face, the character knows, but he's not acknowledging it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such a subtlety, and whether the child's actually performing that, or that comes out of the edit and the adult's performance or whatever, there's that underlying hidden truth.
Yeah.
That really, really, really messes with me when I watch it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's. I rewatched it the other day, and it's creepy from the get-go, isn't it? I mean, it opens with this kind of, you just looking at a black screen and you're just hearing that song, that Willow Whaley song.
I love and again, the Borderlands has a lot to answer for in this sense. We chose to do the end credit song in the Borderlands in a similar fashion based on the effect of this song and the innocence, and just the weedy little child's voice over black. And it should be, if we were watching it with someone picking flowers and daisies and puppies and sunshine, it would have a completely different effect.
Exactly.
But because they just let it sit with you.
Yeah. And I think you can say that for so many of the creepy elements of this film. It's like a shot of a woman just standing by the lake. There's nothing, she's not, got hideous makeup or...
There's nothing obvious.
There's nothing obviously scary about it, but it's just the way it's framed shot, the atmosphere that they build is
and again,
incredible.
Context.
Yeah.
Always context, yeah.
It's always this element of like, it's just something that shouldn't be there, I suppose.
Exactly.
Isn't it?
It's just a bit wrong.
yeah.
And I think that, taking these really hyper normal settings and just having that one piece that seems to be out of place can really be effective.
Yeah. What did you think of the performances in this then? I mean, you've already spoken about the children. Obviously, Deborah Carr, who plays Miss Giddens, the governess. I mean, it's an incredible performance, I think, that central performance. I love
it in context of this film. It's such an interesting thing, because I think if those kind of performances don't work in modern cinema. You can see definitely, and I wouldn't say it is dated, but I don't think that diminishes the effect of it, because I think, again, context, it's within the setting and everything else of a film, which is of an era. But I think it's still just as impactful. Her quiet glances and her big old shocked eyes, which she's sort of holding it all in with watching all of this unfold around her.
Why, that night when you were supposed to be in bed, why were you in the garden?
I told you.
The real reason, Miles.
It's beyond me why you go on asking a fellow questions when every time he answers them, you tell him it isn't true.
Because you are not telling the truth.
Don't shout. Don't be so angry. It does something to your face. It makes you look ugly and cruel.
But in all honesty, the kids, I love them because you can never... And again, from a practical, technical level, you can't really tell if the kids are giving you what you think they're giving you, or if that's something the filmmakers have created around their performances. But they're so real and so straightforward that it's just that one little piece that's offset. Just uncanny. It's just absolutely menacing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that's it. I mean, these kids are they like just innocent, as the title suggests, or is there something sinister about them? I mean, again, it's one of the best traits about these kind of ghost movies is, is this a story about ghosts, or is it this woman who's just unhinged, who's kind of a bit of a sort of unreliable narrator potentially, isn't she?
Yes, and it's so funny because it's such an interesting trope in films. You look at Repulsion, or
absolutely,
my frequent favorite horror film, which is Rosemary's Baby. I say frequent favorite because obviously it always flexes around, and we always, depending on the day. But it's certainly and in some modern films as well. But there's this element of the hysterical woman.
Yeah.
This trope of the hysterical woman. And you occasionally get it with male characters. Like if you're looking at something like Quatermass. Like Quatermass is frequently unbelieved because he's a crazy scientist.
Yeah.
Or that kind of thing. But more often than not, you get the hysterical woman. And God knows we just can't hold our shit together.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I think too, actually, in a way that gives it a new context in modern film, because you know, with feminism where it is now, and you know, women's voices being heard or being ignored, it creates a really interesting context to look back at these films, and look at a woman who is saying something is wrong here, something's not right, and the men around her, who are the ones with authority and power, are the ones saying, "Oh, don't be ridiculous. You're just being silly. You're hysterical. It'll all be fine. There's nothing wrong there." And unfortunately, we see a lot of that mirrored in our modern culture with what's going on around us now. But yeah, so it's fantastic, really. Again, it's
so
just
good.
still so relevant.
And there is this, like, you know, I suppose it comes from this, you know, stories of this era in particular, you know, there's a lot of repressed there's a lot of like weird sort of sexual stuff going on just under the surface here, isn't there?
Absolutely. Well, and with the Innocence especially, because the source material Turn of the Screw is quite pedophile-y.
Well, and the film is a little bit.
Well, exactly, and it's I mean, if you can imagine, the source material ramps it up big time. Like within the context of the source material, these kids are being raped by ghosts.
Right, okay.
Which is like, imagine that as an opera when you're 8.
Right, okay.
But so, you know, and again, because I'd seen the source material before I came to the film, I was aware of this weird context, but the way that they meter it out within the film.
Yeah.
And again, it's, you know, the little boy who this governess is meant to be the caretaker for begins to make sexual advances towards her. Mm-hmm. And it's not, you know, I'm sure, you know, I've babysitted my friend's kids at one point, and the 3-year-old's walking around with his pants off, but he's just like, "What's your name?" And it's like, that's, you know, that's childish sort of play mockery of adult behavior. But this kid is actually trying to pull her, and he is almost kind of succeeding. It's very weird. It's as though the performance is so mature.
Yes.
That is what really drives the eeriness of it.
Miles, what are you hiding under your pillow?
I'm not hiding it. I'm keeping it warm. I found it this morning. One of my pigeons. I couldn't, could I, leave it out there alone?
But, Miles, its neck. It looks as though
someone had broken it. Yes, poor thing. I'll bury it tomorrow. Kiss me goodnight, Miss Giddens.
Those kiss scenes in the film, there is something so disturbing about them. And you're right, you know, on the surface of it, it's kids will want to kiss adults, you know, there's nothing sexual about it. But again, I think we're seeing it through this woman's eyes, who is, I think, you know, at least portrayed as quite a repressed, maybe quite sexually hungry woman. I mean, because we see at the beginning, don't we, the opening scene when she meets the uncle, and she clearly kind of likes the
hello.
uncle. Yeah.
Bit of that.
And so
How long will you be around?
Yeah, exactly. And so these moments when she's with Miles, the little boy, and like there's that scene as well when he's sort of riding the horse around, and she's looking at him again, like almost kind of a little bit lustfully or something.
And he's doing sort of a Mr. Darcy routine,
Yeah.
isn't he? He's giving that like nobleman on horseback.
Yes.
But it's a child.
Yes.
And I think it's that composure, it's that very mature composure that these kids have that really, really pushes that sensibility through.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's the I love about the kiss. He holds on to her for a moment.
Yes.
Doesn't he? He won't let her go.
Yes.
And the thing is, he's a child. She could rip him away.
Yes.
She could overpower him quite easily.
Yes.
But she allows it
Yes.
to go on for slightly too long as well.
Yeah.
And you know, again, there's nothing in the explicit context.
No.
But you have to read the subtext for where it goes.
Yeah.
And it's just, it goes to some pretty weird places.
It does.
Really, at the end of
And
the
I'm
day.
sure that's partly down to her reaction, isn't it? Had she just smiled and kissed him back and thought nothing of it, but she looks at him in this kind of scared, or you're not quite sure what she's feeling kind of a way.
It's a very WTF mate kind of a look. It's sort of like, it's like, you what now? And it's, whoa, where did you learn that from?
Yeah.
And Well, that's just really quick. That's the thing as well, is that these children, they don't live in the world that children live in now.
Yeah.
They live in a country house by themselves. Where would he have learned to kiss like this?
Well, exactly.
Oh, miss, there's things I've seen I'm ashamed to say.
Go on.
Rooms. Used by daylight, as though they were dark woods.
They didn't care that you saw them? And the children?
I can't say, miss. I don't know what the children saw.
There is this question of are they really, the way that they can explain these weird kisses is, is this little boy possessed by the ghost of Peter Quint, or is he just a boy that's kind of on the cusp of puberty, growing up, a sexual awakening, or is it all through her eyes and she's a bit messed up?
Well, exactly. And there's elements of as well as, is there another adult, another living adult who's actually giving this kid this input? Is there, originally the governess thinks that there is she doesn't think it's a ghost at first. She doesn't go straight to ghost. She thinks that there is a man who is wandering the estate, talking to the children. And that initially is what terrifies her. And it is a terrifying thought to think that there's this stranger who God knows who he is. She's never seen him, but the children mention him, or she might have seen a flash of him.
Yeah.
Who the hell is this guy?
Yeah.
How is he giving the Miles kissing lessons?
Yeah.
We should be concerned if so.
Did you play games in your house?
No, we had to be quiet usually because my father was preparing his sermon. But if he went out, we'd play hide and seek all over the house.
Oh, lovely! Let's do that.
All right.
Okay, we've got to talk about one of the most famous, iconic, creepy moments in the film, which is that scene where Miss Giddens and the children play hide and seek.
I'm coming!
It starts off very jovial, and there's that kind of music as she runs around the house trying to find them. There's that slight odd moment when she sees a woman walk through the corridor, and we don't know whether it's the maid or something else, but she kind of ignores it and she goes up to the attic. Now, the attic is creepy enough in itself, and it's full of that kind of horror, ghost story iconography, rocking chairs and old toys, and that's of course where she finds that photo of Peter Quint. She looks at it, and again there's this kind of strange, uncanny creepiness to this whole moment.
You'd never have found me if I hadn't pounced on you. Oh. Did I frighten you?
Yes, a bit.
And of course, at this moment, that's when Miles jumps out on her and he sort of throws his arm around her and he's sort of overexcited. Now, at this point, what is going on? Is Miles actually trying to strangle her? Because she begins to panic. She sort of says, Miles, stop, you're hurting me. He just says, am I?
Now you're my prisoner.
Oh, Miles, let me go.
Why?
You're hurting me.
Am I?
Yes, Miles, please let me go.
And what's brilliant about this film is exactly what's brilliant about this moment is that you don't know. We're seeing the panic in Miss Giddens' eyes here as she starts to worry that Miles is genuinely trying to hurt her. And Miles is playing it in a way that could be construed as either or, This could be just a completely innocent little boy who's just playing and isn't aware of the fact that he might be hurting her. Or is there something more sinister going on there? Is he actually trying to hurt her? Or is he possessed? We really don't know at this point, and neither does Miss Giddens. But Miss Giddens kind of believes that there's something dark happening, that there's something wrong happening to her at this moment. And the way that the film is kind of scored and shot, we're kind of led to believe that with her. And it's all part of that kind of point of view of the fact that we are seeing the world through Miss Giddens' eyes, through this, let's face it, potentially unreliable narrator. And then, of course, that is preceded straight away by the moment where she first sees a ghost close up at the window. And it's that terrific moment with Peter Quint, played by the late, great Peter Wingard, who looks at her just with these incredibly terrifying eyes. And he's got that mix of kind of, smoulderingly handsome and looking at her in a way that is kind of lusting after her, but also kind of threatening. And at that moment, there's no big orchestral score. There's nothing. It's just a very strange, silent moment of unease. And we're not quite sure what to make of it.
Your brain can provide you with a logical explanation as to why this is happening.
Yeah.
But everything in your gut, your instinct, everything is telling you, no, this is supernatural.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a funny thing. So I have night terrors.
Right.
It's something that I've grown up with. I've had all my life.
Yeah.
But that is definitely something that has impacted my interest in genre films.
Yeah.
Because it's a safe place to have those fears and have those
Absolutely.
experiences. But these moments really remind me of night terrors, where you're seeing something that you're positive isn't there. It can't be there. There's no way it's there. But your brain is going, mate, it's there. This is real. This is real, and you need to be frightened of it.
God, yeah.
And it's such an incredible way to see that experience depicted on screen. That it's just impactful. It just hits you like a hammer.
It is, and that's again like we've covered it already. But the way that these ghost movies channel that kind of uncanniness, and we've all had that experience where you wake up in the night and is there somebody stood
the
there?
pile of
Is
clothes
that
on a chair that you're positive is a man.
Exactly. Is that the dressing gown I hung from the door, or is that a person stood? And you have that kind of 5 or 10 seconds when you're kind of squinting, going, what the fuck?
Trying to hold your breath and not move in case this intruder knows you're there.
yeah, exactly.
But you know what? And again, I think modern cinema has a lot to be grateful to these films for, because if you look at a film like Insidious, and when the mother goes up to look at her baby's crib, and there's that big hulking silhouette of a figure behind the gossamer curtains.
Yeah, terrifying. That's the scariest bit in that film.
Oh my days!
Yeah.
But I feel it's that moment.
Yeah.
It's that moment of, who is this? Why is this?
Yeah.
And initially the fear comes from the reality of it. Initially the fear comes from the reality of, there is someone here. I'm meant to be protecting these children.
Mm-hmm.
What do I do?
Yeah.
To, oh my God, what is this thing?
Yeah, absolutely. What I love about these old films as well is that it's still so restrained. Like, I think with movies now like Insidious or The Conjuring, they're great, but they will always descend into a final act where we see the monster in all its glory. And sometimes I'd rather not, like those moments,
It's
the
like
moments
the
where you
Jaws
see
thing,
the
isn't
figure. Yeah, exactly. It's like the Jaws thing, exactly. The Innocence and The Haunting, they never have that climactic, okay, now we're going to see the monster type of a moment. Really, it's restrained until the very, very end. It's...
Well, absolutely, because in and of itself, and again, I think this goes to that sort of the shortcuts of horror, the shortcuts of fear.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing inherently frightening about the figure of these people's figures.
No,
they're not emaciated. They're not got glowing red eyes. They're not odd. It's just the context in which we're seeing them that makes them horrifying.
Yeah.
And almost in a way, the reveals at the end are almost an affirmation of your worst fears. It's almost, now you're seeing them and being told, yes, this is what you worried it would be.
Yeah.
You've seen it before. You've seen a flash of the face. You've seen the woman in the field. But now we're telling you all of your worst fears are true.
Yeah.
This was what you were frightened it could be.
Yeah.
Whereas, as you say, in monster movies, this, that, and the other, the promise of the premise is this great hulking beast that's been designed and is interesting and has pussy ooping drips and all this kind of stuff. But it's there's no tension in that.
No.
There's no upset.
There's not many examples I can think of where the payoff of seeing the monster is actually worth it. The Thing is the best one I can think of, where it's like, okay, what you're seeing on screen is more terrifying than any build-up.
Well, absolutely. But if you remember, obviously with The Thing as well, when you get to the end, we don't see a monster at the end. It's two humans.
It could be anything.
Quote, humans.
Yes.
And then also with The Thing, they're constantly changing, aren't they? It's the perversion of the familiar.
Exactly.
So it's every time they reveal a monster, it's a new perversion of the familiar, which is what is terrifying. I love that dog, but if we saw the dog beast, but if we saw it over and over and over again, it would just be funny after a certain point.
You're right. Yeah,
but because whenever we see these things bolden in our face, it's a familiar figure. The guy's head on the back of the weird spider thing, and it's all again. It's just wrong. It's just not natural, and so it's wonderful to relish in those images. But then when you get around to ghosts, what is a ghost if not the perversion of the natural?
Yeah.
Something like one of my favorite moments in The Others is in The Others when the little girl is playing in the attic with the toys.
Yeah.
She turns around and she's got an old lady's face.
Yeah.
What, mummy? It's just me.
Yeah.
And if you listen to that without looking at it, it wouldn't be frightening. If you watched it without seeing the old woman's face, it wouldn't be frightening. If you just saw an old woman sat there, it wouldn't be as frightening. It wouldn't be frightening, but it's the perversion.
Absolutely.
And it's that twist of the normal. And again, I think that when you look at these children, the fact that they are so mature, that is what's creepy.
Yeah.
And it's, I love these. I don't have kids, but occasionally I'll hear from my friends or see online or something, these lists of creepy things kids say.
Yes, brilliant. I love that.
And it's just freaky.
It is.
Because, and they have no idea, you've got this, again, this innocent thing that suddenly says, Mummy, can you say goodnight to the man who lives in my closet?
Yeah.
He said he'd be seeing you later. Like, it's like, you what now? And again, it's perfectly innocent.
Yeah.
But because it's just so unnatural.
Yeah, yeah.
It completely throws you for a loop.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And that is what's so brilliant about The Innocence, is that, so much of what happens on screen until maybe the very last act could be construed as completely innocent. But we are seeing it through our adult perverse eyes and seeing more to it. It's
Absolutely.
just, it's so brilliant. Yeah. And that last image again, it's another kiss, isn't it? But that last image is truly disturbing.
It's very upsetting.
Very upsetting.
It's sort of it gives you the ookies for a couple hours later.
Yeah. And the other moment I think that is my favorite is that brilliant the moment that relies purely on sound design, where she is just hearing voices around every door and she's wandering the corridor with the candle. It's the really famous image, and it is just incredible. It builds and builds and builds and builds. You don't really see anything, do you? It's
and this is sound design again at play, and it's so much can be done, so much can be implied with sound design. And I think it's, again, when you give somebody, when you give an audience member a certitude, when you tell them this is how it is, it's very difficult to be frightened of a certitude in a way. But when you can give them a suggestion or a question or a concern that this might be what's going on without answering it, then that's so much more frightening. And sound design is really your best tool for that.
Yeah.
Like there's visuals are so certain, but sound is so subtle that it can just imply things without ever hammering us across the head with it.
It is dead.
And it's also the cinematography as well, actually. And again, something we'll talk about with The Haunting a lot. But the way the kind of camera spins around her at that moment, as well,
it's
as
disorientating as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
It doesn't. It's not a static, consistent shot that you can absorb all the information easily. It's frenetic and chaotic, and you can't grasp onto anything. It's a very emotional shot, isn't it?
Very, yeah. And it is very reminiscent of, like you say, movies that come afterwards, like Repulsion and that kind of thing. The way that the camera work kind of is, this is a woman going crazy, kind of thing.
It's a psychological camera, isn't it? It's
Yes.
a camera that's not depicting what your eye is saying, but what your brain is feeling.
Exactly. Yeah. Amazing. Fantastic. Anything else you want to mention on The Innocence before we move on?
I just go. If you haven't seen it, go see it. I think we've managed to sort of patter around things enough that it would still be a fresh experience with anybody watching it. And
Totally.
And absolutely, and don't go volunteer to be a nanny for two weird kids in the countryside. Seems to be the lesson we've all learned.
Oh my God, I love the it's filmed in kind of, I think it's CinemaScope as well, isn't it? It's
beautiful.
that kind of very wide and
isolating
I
camera.
read that he actually literally smudged the edges of the corners of the lens, so everything has that kind of blurred border,
Dreamy
almost.
sort of
Yeah,
feel
it
to
gives
it.
it that kind of dreaminess, and it looks like it's all lit by candlelight and that kind of a thing as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It just
Well,
looks
and I
incredible.
think the, as far as like the justification for the lighting, I think the practical lighting is either natural light or candlelight with this kind of film, which I think actually is similar to The Haunting, because I think they mentioned that the lights don't work in a lot of rooms, so they have to carry candles. And, and of course, it seems like such a trope for a horror film of scary candles, but but there's a reason, you know,
Absolutely.
when you can't see all the way through to the corners of the room, what's hiding in the darkened corner.
Yes.
And the way that candlelight, that firelight is almost living and dancing and creating multiple shadows and directing the eye to certain places.
Yes, exactly. Constantly moving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's an unreliable eye, really, the light cast by candlelight.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, technically, it's a really interesting film. The exteriors always really interested me because they're hugely wide. They're hugely wide. A lot of these exterior shots, and at the time they just didn't have the power to practically light them.
Yeah.
So what they've done for the most part is use natural light and then augment it with just small bits of staging light, and the way they've pulled it off is just spectacular.
Yeah,
it's really
it's true.
really worth seeing. And there's a I would definitely recommend people watch it remastered, because it is an older film, and a lot of the copies have really badly suffered over time, and to really get the full impact of the sound and the imagery, I think the remastered version, and there's some great remasters out there
there's
as
a
well.
gorgeous BFI version.
There you go.
That is that is but it's fantastic, and that sound, you know, ramp up the volume and turn down the lights, it is just incredible.
God, it knows I'm here.
Look, I know the supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
Now look, Doc, we're buddies, okay? But don't try to convert me.
I'm trying to prepare you. My name's Marquay, Dr. Marquay, a scientist interested in the supernatural. The unnatural, if you like. I came to Hill House to find the key to another world. Assisting me in this exploration of the unknown was Eleanor, Nell, who could look back into the past, and Theo, something of a witch, who could see into the future. This is Luke, who didn't believe in anything, until evil, patient and waiting, made him change his mind.
Okay, let's move on to The Haunting then, 1963. So this was a couple of years later. What do you remember the first time you ever watched The Haunting, or what your impressions of it were?
So again, I came to this slightly sideways, because before I had ever seen The Haunting, I'd watched The Haunting on Hill House,
Yes.
The Haunting. This is a
no,
film that's
not the remake with
yeah,
Catherine
this is a
Zeta.
film that's been remade so many times in so many ways.
Yeah.
And I'd actually seen all of the remakes before I saw the original, because
Right.
again, I didn't come at my horror education from any sort of practical or classical way, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so I knew what was going to happen. I knew the narrative of the film. So it was really watching the characters that was really interesting for me. And it was quite recently, actually, my first watch. It was a couple of years ago. And it was because I was doing a little, we all program little seasons for ourselves, don't we? We like a bit of that. It was because I was programming myself a sort of television horror season.
Great.
And I was watching things again like Quatermass and The Innocence was on there as well, and a lot of the old Hammer stuff. And there's a lot of very good sort of countryside witch things.
Yes, absolutely.
And when this came up, I thought, well, I ought to see the original.
Yeah.
If I'm gonna purport myself to be a cineast, then I've got to watch this original film.
It's up there, isn't it? As most people's kind of top 10s, top 20s in terms of critics.
Absolutely. And it's and you know what, the thing that struck me most, and it's where everything that followed has really let the script down, is that this really focuses again on this female hysteria.
Oh,
and
100%.
And the is she, isn't she? The other versions, they all get into the yes, there's ghosts in this house, pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But what this version does so well is it keeps us wondering, is this real or is she creating it?
Oh yeah, 100%.
And it's like, for instance, a scene that a lot of the remakes also have is when the bloody message ends up painted at the top of the stairwell.
Yeah.
And in the Liam Neeson Catherine Zeta-Jones remake, it's just pony. It's like it's like, ooh, creepy house.
Yeah.
And then in this beautiful original, it's has this crazy woman done this because she wants us to believe that this is true, and she wants the attention.
Yeah.
And it's for attention, which I think is really interesting, is they've invited her there but they think that she's putting all of this on so that she will get attention.
Yeah.
And so it's not even following her track record or anything else, but they assume that her hysteria is because she wants the focus on her.
Yeah.
Which she couldn't be further from it. Her character is so timid and so mousy and has gone her whole life without acknowledgement that she has never craved acknowledgement. And so to have that put on her as a reason for fabricating these instances is really heartbreaking for her as a character.
Yeah.
And then ultimately it comes full circle when she is acknowledged by the ghosts.
Yes.
When actually it's, she spends all of her time in the human realm with people dismissing her and telling her she's worthless and pointless and she's crazy and she's all this kind of... And then you get to the ghosts who actually by the end of the film, I don't really even feel like they're baddies.
No.
It's almost a happy ending. The way that the ghosts take over her and sort of make her their own, as it were.
Well, she's so desperate to be in that house, isn't she? She wants to stay there forever. She loves it. She's desperate to not go back to her real life of living with her sister in that little flat, and she just so it kind of is. It's like she's found her home once she's there. Well, it is,
and
it's
and her backstory, and I love, for some reason, the opening of this film really reminds me of Psycho, where you get this sort of relaxed, very domestic opening of people's lives, which is nothing really to impact the narrative, but what it does do is it sets up their characters' struggles and their characters' conflicts. And for her, she was nursing her mother, who is not as far as we can tell, not going to win a Mother of the Year award anytime soon. Nursing her dying, bedridden mother, and then there's this implication that she let her mother die.
Yeah.
And we're never quite sure if that's an accident or if it was intentional.
Yes.
So she's got this where she was belittled and abused by her dying mother, and now that her mother's died, her sister has inherited the house and everything else. So that's a slap in the face. And her sister doesn't respect that she looked after the mother, or this, that, and the other. And the sister's again sort of this boorish, belittling figure. And so our heroine runs away.
Yeah.
She runs away without permission. She's a middle-aged woman. Why she needs permission, I'm not sure. I think it to some extent, I think it's a social context at the time that for a single woman to go out into the world without telling her brother-in-law was very, very risque.
Oh, it's funny, isn't it? Because it's this and The Innocence, both of these women, these quote-unquote unhinged, hysterical women, are both spinsters, aren't they? They both don't have husband and children.
Well, if a man doesn't love her, then clearly something wrong.
Yes, she's mad. I mean,
she must be
she's mad. She's mad because she hasn't felt the love of a man. This is the problem. Although actually, there is some definite lesbian stuff going on in this movie isn't there?
Absolutely, and it's and again, it's the casting is really fantastic. I would say that is one thing that the Liam Neeson remake does, is the casting. Catherine Zeta-Jones is Theodora, which Claire Bloom originally plays.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Who's this sort of sexy psychic lady.
Yeah.
Was just spectacular, and Eleanor and Theodora end up becoming bunkmates in the house because Eleanor is too frightened to be on her own, and Theodora is very bolshy and secure in herself, so she invites Eleanor into her bedroom, and there ends up being a lot of these two women sort of very, very cuddly in the bed, sort of strokey, like, and it's never quite clear. I'll be honest, it's one of the elements of the film that I'm never quite clear if it's intentional or if it's our modern eye interpreting it that way, if at the time it would have been so far from the minds of the filmmakers. Because to include that kind of lesbian sexual relationship at the time would have been incredibly controversial.
Yeah.
And it's not something the critics bring up. So I do wonder how much of that is our modern
Maybe.
interpretation of
it.
Well,
I do think that the film is definitely portraying Theo as a gay character. Yes. I don't know about Eleanor, but I think it is in there, definitely. I don't know because there is a conversation at one point the two women have with each other as well, where I feel like they're kind of saying it but not, where Eleanor is kind of really put off by Claire Bloom's character for suggesting such a thing. Sort of thing.
And again, it plays to Theodora's sort of worldliness and her her risque attitude in general.
Yes. Yes,
So
yes,
so
yeah.
it could, you know, as you say, it could very well be in the text.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I only just discovered when rewatching it that the character of Luke is played by Russ Tamblyn, who is in Twin Peaks. And I was like, oh my God, he's like, 40 years later is old Dr. Jacoby in Twin Peaks. I was like, awesome. But it's a good cast, actually. Again, you know.
Well, it is. And in this instance, a much more prolific sort of well-known director as well.
Yeah,
because we're looking at
absolutely.
Robert Weiss, obviously, in this one. And you know, whereas with The Innocence, it was sort of a, you know, a B movie director on a B movie path.
Yeah.
For Weiss,
Wise, I think.
There we go. It's kind of, it's almost a blip on a much more blockbustery career path. Like, he'd done West Side Story before this film.
Yes.
Which is a weird, I find it really, really interesting that, because West Side Story was a blockbuster of its time. It was a
Best
huge
Picture winner.
film.
Yeah.
Exactly. It was a huge success in the financially. Critically very well reviewed.
I like to be in America, okay by me in America, everything free in America.
For a small fee in America.
And so for a director to choose to then go do a B movie, a ghost story B movie, which was very, very frowned upon culturally and seen as sort of a waste of it wasn't art. It was pure entertainment.
For most filmmakers, it's their way in, isn't it? It's the other way around.
Exactly. So it's really interesting to see someone with that kind of experience and that kind of power behind what he was doing to choose to make this film.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it shows, I think there's a lot more of the director's hand in this particular
100%.
film.
Yeah.
I think between the characters and the staging and this kind of thing, you see a lot more of the director in the film.
Are you awake? Don't say a word, Theo, not a word. Don't let it know you're in my room.
I think The Haunting is just very much a director's film amongst everything else, and you can so see Robert Wise's sort of craft, you know, as absolutely this is a kind of Oscar-winning, Oscar-worthy director at the helm here. Just the way that he kind of manipulates point of view and kind of represents that madness or that supernatural force, whichever way you want to look at it. And I think a brilliant scene to talk about in regards to this kind of thing is that fantastic set piece where Elle is lying in bed and hears the giggling behind the wall. Our view here is so limited. The camera is very, very tight. It's very close on Nell's face there, so we can't actually see anything around her. The light is very, very dim, and we cut back and forth between her reaction and this wall that the noise is coming from.
Do you think it's over? Theo, you're breaking my hand.
So much brilliant sound design here as well, and production design. And actually, if you take a look at that wall, you can see that there's this sort of this weird intricate pattern. Actually looks like a face, like an angry face, and again kind of brings to mind that this house is something alive. It's something evil. There's some brilliant camera work here as well, as Robert Wise's camera kind of slowly edges towards this wall and the camera begins to tilt slightly. Again, just to give you the feeling that something is a bit off, nothing is quite right.
This is monstrous, this is cruel. It is hurting a child, and I will not let anyone, anything hurt a child. I will not endure this. Things to scare me, well, it has, and poor Theo too. Honestly. Feels like she's breaking my hand.
And as if this kind of creepy laughing isn't enough, that then begins to turn into what sounds like a child in pain or in peril. And suddenly we're led to believe, okay, are we hearing some sort of child abuse going on here? So things gradually get darker and darker, and the scene obviously then begins to crescendo.
And I will yell, I will yell, I will yell.
And then finally, of course, you've got that epic, wonderful payoff, the part that everyone remembers, that absolutely always, to this day, every time I watch it, sends shivers down my spine when we realise that Theo is actually asleep across the other side of the room, and therefore, whose hand was she holding?
God! Whose hand was I holding?
love that. And it's kind of a classic miniature horror story, isn't it? There's that.
It's like an urban folk tale.
Exactly. There's that. I always heard it as the girl's gone to sleep and she puts her hand down and her dog licks her hand.
That's it. Yeah.
And so she knows everything's okay because the dog's licking her hand. And then when she wakes up the morning, there's her butchered dog, and across the wall and in the dog's blood is written, "Humans can lick hands too." And it's obviously that's a sort of cheesy, childish, modernized version of it, but it's obviously this idea that you think you're safe.
Yes.
But you were never safe.
No.
And I think too, in a way, that's very much what The Haunting is about for her. Is that she comes from a situation where she wasn't safe. Mm-hmm. Nobody cared for her, nobody wanted her, and they relished in bullying her in a way. And then she gets to this haunted house and they want her. Mm-hmm. The ghosts want her, the children ghosts want her, the ex-wife ghosts want her. And they just want to possess her. Mm-hmm. And I think that's another major similarity between the two films, is this idea of possessing someone.
Yes.
Is having someone for your own. And I think one of the big differences is that in The Innocence, our lead is pushing back against that possession. Whereas in The Haunting, she's running towards it.
Yeah, she just wants it.
She wants to be a part of something so desperately that even if being part of it is being a part of this perverse haunted house, then she'll take it.
Yeah.
Better that than nothing.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting to see how the other characters respond to that, because initially they just dismiss her as this hysterical woman, and as the time moves on, they think she's crazy for wanting to stay there.
Yeah.
And they're all trying to convince her to leave, but she knows that this is the best scenario for her.
Yeah.
And in a way it is. And that's why I find it almost not horrific. I mean, it's scary, but towards the end, it's almost a happy ending. It's almost a fairy tale ending for her.
It is, for this woman who is a bit crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is. Yeah, it's like Jack Torrance in The Shining ending up, there forever in the picture.
Exactly.
It's that kind of thing,
like,
isn't
now
it?
I've got what I wanted all along.
Yeah.
Even if what I wanted is probably bad for me and a bit mental.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, it's much more of a proper haunted house, isn't it, than The Innocence as well? Whereas, it's a real cliche to say, but the house itself is a character.
Yeah.
Like that. I mean, and actually, what I do think that the house is brilliant. I love the way that they build it up with kind of doors are all on angles so they don't stay shut, and it's all these little details of the actual production design of the house is a huge part of The Haunting, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And so many haunted house movies to come after that, where it's like, okay, it's about the place rather than the people as well.
And it's I think too, in particular with The Haunting, and I think this is right, I know it's true of some of the other films, I think it's based on Winchester House, which was this sort of piecemeal built house that, again, it's sort of a romantic architecture thing where the husband was building it for his wife, and people die along the way, and architects die, and the wife dies, and the husband dies, and somebody keeps trying to go on with it, and things keep happening.
Yes.
That mean that the house can't go forward, and they all seem to have a supernatural cause. And this is truthful. This is a true story about the Winchester House. And I think all of those things about things being at odd angles and hallways that go on forever, and you're walking around and you get lost.
Yes.
Because none of the turns are at a right angle. The turns are all at a sort of 60-degree angle.
Exactly.
So you think you've gone 3 turns and you should be back at the same place, but really you're miles off.
Yeah.
And all of this kind of like perversion of the space. And I think too, our homes are where we're supposed to feel safest. Mm-hmm. Our homes, our domestic spaces are meant to be where we feel secure. And so I think taking these spaces and twisting them into being the enemy is exceptionally unsettling in that sense. And so to make as you say, to make the house the character, to make the house what is, it's not that there are ghosts haunting the house. It is that the house is a ghost.
Yeah, the house is a living thing, isn't it? Almost. Yeah,
exactly.
It is. It's literally sort of calling to her. That's the thing.
And I think too, my impression of the film is that there's not one ghost that's coming after her.
No,
and it's not even that I don't really feel that we even ever have them. Obviously we've got the backstory of the husband building it and his wife died and the next wife didn't. But I don't think as much as we name those characters in the history of the house, we ever really specifically name the force that's coming after her.
No.
That it could literally just be the house.
The house.
To the extent that the house could be what killed the previous people.
Yes.
that we're never really given a clear image of who is behind this or what is behind this.
Yes, exactly. It's that kind of chicken egg thing, isn't it? Where it's like, okay, well, did all these things happen in the past because of the house, or is the house haunted because of all these
things
people?
that happened? Exactly. Yeah. And I think that element as well adds to the idea of the fear of the domestic space. Is that, just by walking through the thresholds, you are putting yourself at danger because the house is a danger.
Yeah.
And that's lovely, especially, and I love too. So they walk into the space and they love the space because they've never been in this kind of luxury before.
Yeah.
So you get this immediate conflict between someone who's excited to walk in and explore and dinner will be served on the sideboard.
Yes.
And all this kind of stuff. And then you immediately get into the house betraying them where they can't find where the kitchen is. So they can't get down to supper.
Yeah.
And as well, I've got the housekeeper and her husband. Oh my God, I love them so much. In walking home in the dark. And
it's much more, it is cheesier and it's more Hollywoody than The Innocence, isn't it? That's for sure.
Absolutely.
I mean, all of those elements.
But that's fine.
They're great. It's great fun. It's a great fun movie. If anything, I could have done with a little bit less talk. Like you said, you mentioned about The Innocence. It's like, even if you removed the dialogue, you'd still get it. You'd still find it terrifying. There's a lot of explaining the history of the house, the characters. There's a lot of internal monologues as well with Eleanor that I could have done with a little bit less of sometimes.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a cheat,
just my personal taste.
It's again, it's an easy solution voiceover and this kind of thing, and show don't tell and all that kind of stuff. So it's relatively easy solutions as far as that kind of thing goes. And I think they probably spent more time on the filming of the film than the writing of the film.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, it's almost though when she first meets the housekeeper and the housekeeper has this spiel about, look, the door's dinner served then. I don't stay here. There's no one, exactly, classic Harbinger. No one can hear you.
Yes.
And then as our heroine follows her through to talk to Theodora, it's exactly word for word the same bit.
Yes.
And it's interesting because as the audience, obviously the first time you hear it, you're with the character and she's creeped out, so you're creeped out, and it feels a bit on the nose and hokey, but you're sort of going with it. But then to have it repeated, you realize, is this a script?
Yes.
Is this something the housekeeper is saying to scare the women? Is this a setup? And so it's that sort of thing where you realize it's not the film that's being hokey, but the character.
Absolutely.
Who is.
It's so true. It suddenly becomes comedic when you hear it that second time.
It really does.
Yeah.
And as well because Eleanor is playing along with it in that way. She's riffing on it. She's not afraid.
No.
And I think that is one of the interesting things as well, is that for a lot of the film, she's not afraid.
Yeah.
It's not until you get this really intense physical presence of the house shaking and the doorknob going and the rumbling and the noises that she does begin to get afraid. Every other time, she's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Which is, again, why I think the hysteria is so interesting.
It's so good, yeah.
She doesn't demonstrate herself to be a frightened, fragile, mousy woman. She demonstrates herself to be fairly well contained. And, she is growing out of her mousiness. That's part of her character's journey, growing out of her timidness.
Yeah.
But she's never worried for no reason.
No.
And so for the male characters in particular, to deny her upset as hysterical when she has been so perfectly logical in so many other sequences is, again, it's really interesting to see them dismiss her in that way.
Yeah, again, they get a really good balance, I think, in both these movies of the kind of fragile psyche with the paranormal. The moment when she hears the banging in the night and she goes, "Coming, mother, I'm coming." Like, she has this like half asleep flashback to she thinks it's her mum banging on the wall, but it's just the house kind of bringing that memory back or whatever. But it's just really clever.
Well, and there's this implication as well that the house knows about her and her mother.
Yeah.
That the house has taken what she sees as her deepest sin, and that it's bringing it back to her.
Yeah.
That it may well be that the reason that noise triggers that memory is because the house is intending it to.
Yeah.
And so again, it's this very active manipulation of this supernatural force of her and her experience. And even, I mean, at the end of the day, that the supernatural force is trying to kick everyone else out and keep her there. And it's a lot more and again, I'm going into this having seen the remakes first, which is unfortunate, but it's a lot more obvious in the remakes why that is.
Yes.
But I think the subtlety of it within the original film is still there, that she is a nurturer.
Yeah.
And this house needs to be nurtured. It needs love. Mm-hmm. And even if it has to kill you, you will love it.
Yes, exactly.
Because no one else loves the house. The caretaker doesn't love the house. The housekeeper doesn't love the house. They hate it. They're frightened of it. Everybody's always frightened of it. But she loves it when she comes in, and it wants to keep that. And that's really interesting to me. The idea of it's really just all about a house that needed someone to care.
Oh, it did. Exactly. That's all it needed. It needs some good feng shui and things.
Exactly.
You know?
It's like just a bit of wax. Come on,
Bit of
just hoover me
dusting.
occasionally. That's all I want. That's all I need. Just tell me I've got lovely curtains and I'm a happy camper.
Exactly. I love it. Brilliant. Well, what I love about these two films the most is that they are kind of generally thought of as like the two original scary ghost movies, and they kind of are, that kind of launched it into the mainstream. But, you know, what's brilliant is that you could spend so long discussing them without even discussing the fact that there are ghosts in these movies.
Yeah.
They're really both stories about these like interesting female characters at the center of them that may or may not be crazy, or may not just be kind of victims of their own circumstances.
No,
kind
absolutely.
of thing, which is
well,
brilliant.
and I think there's a very practical reason that when we have ghost stories or hysterics, we see them focusing on female protagonist, and that's that. How is a woman going to beat up Michael Myers?
Yeah.
You know, there's a practicality to having a supernatural fear engage with a female character, because it's something she has the power to confront.
Yeah.
And it's something she has the power to engage with. And I think the hysterics are almost a natural development on from that, because if she's not an idiot, she's going to tell people there's a bloody ghost here.
Yeah.
And if they all said, oh shit, there is, let's help you, the film would be over.
Yeah.
So they have to deny it.
Yeah.
They have to not believe her. So I think in a way it's a bit of a shame, because then you have this whole hysterical woman trope in the media that gets used and obviously things bleed into real life. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But it is, I think, a natural progression for a female character in a way.
Yes.
That if she's not going to come in all Laura Croft or Ripley or whatever as a badass, kick-ass, going to cut it down myself kind of a woman, then what are her tools?
Yeah.
How can she fight back? And the supernatural setting is really a place where a female character can come into her own naturally, without having to give her supernatural powers herself. Not that Ripley's supernatural, she's just born badass.
Natural born badass.
Exactly.
Amazing. Anything else you want to discuss on the haunting before we wrap up?
I would just really, having come to it late myself after seeing the hideous remakes, just really recommending if people haven't seen it to go out and watch it. And get through the first 15 minutes, because I will be honest, it's as a genre fan, those first 15 minutes don't have a whole lot for you.
No.
But they really are sort of set up.
They are.
But once you're into it, it's just really interesting and fun.
It's fun. And when those scary moments come, they are scary.
Exactly.
Well.
I literally jumped.
Yeah.
And and it's still impactful and it's still effective. And as you say, they were the films that changed people's minds about ghost stories not just being for kids.
Yeah.
So
totally.
I think it's worthwhile for anyone who has an affinity for the genre to ground themselves in those films.
They're kind of mature, meaty films that you could watch over and over and get different things out of every time. I think that's what's so brilliant about them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Jen, for joining me.
It's my pleasure.
A couple of questions I always ask everyone, but what is your favorite horror movie?
So at the moment it is Rosemary's Baby, which is kind of my touchstone favorite film. I bounce back and forth, but I adore the way that female paranoia is depicted in that.
It is. And
the creepy old people, and I myself I don't have children, so the idea of a sort of enforced pregnancy is terrifying as well. And it's I think too, there's an element where pregnancy redefines a woman's life, and it's in a way she's got no control over it.
Yeah.
So you can imagine that as a film producer, I'm a little bit type A. I like things to be in my own realm.
Yeah.
So that for me is terrifying. To not only find yourself pregnant, but to have all of these neighbors who are manipulating you, and then suddenly you feel like your husband's in on it, and all this.
The most despicable character in all of cinema,
my
Guy,
God.
absolutely horrible. This like weak, horrible, nasty man.
It's just really absolutely
an actor.
Obviously. And it's and again, it's that hysterics, isn't it? And you don't realize until the end that she's validated, but so too late. And so for me, continuously, I always go back to Rosemary's Baby.
Brilliant choice, amazing. And what is the scariest movie you've ever seen? What's the most scared you've ever been watching a movie?
So.
Is it Killer Clowns?
Well, so there's two answers to this.
Yeah.
And again, I have to pinpoint context, but honestly, Killer Clowns fucks me up. So my husband, who's a physical effects artist, had
Dan Martin, who has been on this podcast.
He has
before.
a lovely, intelligent, a very well spoken chap about many things, but mostly film. But he had cause to make some maquettes of scary clowns a couple months ago. And I had to ask him to take them out of the house because they genuinely give me the willies.
Yeah.
They just unsettle me and give me that little bit of adrenaline in the middle of my core that I just don't want them there. Can they please go? So that definitely. And again, this is another one. I don't think it's because, and the film is well made and frightening, but again, I don't think it's the film itself. I think it's the context in which I watched it was Sinister.
Oh yeah.
And I watched Sinister at Fright Fest. In the big cinema in Theatre 1 Leicester Square before, unfortunately, they did away with
the
it.
IMAX thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was these repeated images of this shadowy figure in the hallway.
Yeah.
And it was really dark, and I just come off, it's a cinema, obviously it's dark. I just come off a film, I was really exhausted. I was a bit pissed, and I started to have a panic attack.
Oh no!
And it's the only time I've ever had a panic attack in a film.
Wow!
And so for me, that I had to go out in the hallway, like chill myself out, have a steadying whiskey. I'm sure that would help, and then venture back in. And
that's amazing. They would have loved that poster quote, wouldn't they?
Well, there you go.
Gave me a panic attack.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's, I've watched the film since and not had quite the same visceral response. And whether that's because it's a rewatch and it's coming or I'm just in a different place watching it. But that was certainly the most affected I'd ever been by a film. And yeah, it's just, I think it's those subtle things, man.
It's
those
subtle things.
Little,
it's what's so brilliant about Sinister, and that is again like The Conjuring, like Insidious. That for me it pushes it too far and it stops being scary towards the end. But those moments when he just hears that kind of ticking of the kind of camera reel going round and he sees those shadows in the corridor or whatever are truly terrifying.
It's unsettling.
Yeah,
and it's it's the thing I freak out about is something. I lived in New York on my own and I lived in LA on my own for a number of years, and you do get this thing as a woman on your own in a house when you hear the noise. There's no one to say, can you go check that out?
Yeah.
So you're there with it, whatever sort of makeshift weapon you've got, be it the curling iron. Let's keep it gender based here. And you're walking down the hallway, seeing this thing at the end of the hallway. It's just that stealing yourself moment, and it's for me, it winds me up. Those things on the edge of vision and the edge of darkness.
Absolutely.
What is there?
Love it. Love it.
But there we go.
Brilliant. What have you got? Can you tell me anything about what film you've got coming up next that people should look out for?
Yeah, so couple fun things coming up. I am in post-production on The Lie of You, which is an adaptation of a book. And it's a very 90s single white female driven doppelganger thriller.
Brilliant.
And that's been a lot of fun. And that's starring Tuppence Middleton, Rupert Graves, Lydia Wilson, and Luke Roberts, who are all spectacular in it. I'm also, I've got a documentary on the go, which is called Spider-Men, which is about tarantulas and the men who love them.
Wow.
No, it's about the tarantulas as pets. There's a beauty pageant for tarantulas up in the Northeast every year. That's sort of the tarantula version of Crufts.
Oh my God.
And I got into the documentary through this event. And the more I was speaking to these people, I do have arachnophobia, as many people do. But the more I got speaking to these people who engage with these creatures on a daily basis and have a genuine love for them, the more I've kind of seen where they're coming from, and that these creatures have personalities and this kind of thing. For instance, there's over 600 species of tarantulas, and none of them are toxic to humans.
Yeah.
So why, the worst
Why
thing
are we
they can give
scared
you
of them?
is a bee sting. So what's the terror? Yeah. So that's the brunt of it
That
for me
sounds
next
great.
year. Really fun stuff. But
Amazing.
other bits and bobs on the go as always. I'll be doing it's a small form project in which I get to wrangle a pack of wolves as they attack a medieval nun, which I'm pretty excited about. I love these images.
Fantastic.
It's just sort of like, as you do on a
You're going to leave me with images of tarantulas and nuns, and I don't know what's going on.
That's my job, man. What can I do?
Love it. And if people want to find you just on like social media or whatever.
I'm very active on Twitter. Love to chat to people on Twitter. I'm at J Handorf because I like to keep it simple and I like to keep it real.
That's it. That's what we like.
But yeah, I'd love anybody to come join me on there and have a little chat. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to my brilliant guest, Jen Handorf. Now, if I sound especially croaky right now, it's because I have lost my voice. Too much excitable chat about horror movies, I think. So throughout the course of this episode, my voice began to drain, and now I am pretty much on the verge of losing my voice. So I'm going to keep this brief. But here are the contact details. Do get in touch with us. Let us know what you thought of The Haunting and The Innocence. I think they're two of the best ghost stories and two of the best horror movies of all time. Do you agree, or do you think they're overrated? Get in touch. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com, or you can find us on Twitter @evolutionpod, or on Facebook. That's facebook.com/evolutionofhorror. And if you can, please do join the Facebook discussion group. That's where you can discuss the movies and the podcast and anything horror related with other listeners. So, next week I've got a very exciting week. We're actually, for the first time on this podcast, veering away from cinema and into television as we move into the late 60s and early 70s. We're going to be talking about a BBC television play, one that terrified audiences everywhere when it was first broadcast, and is still just as scary and powerful today. It's from 1968 and it stars Michael Hordern, and it's called Whistle and I'll Come to You. Now, Whistle and I'll Come to You then sparked an entire series, an entire craze of ghost stories that were shown at Christmas on the BBC. One was shown every single Christmas all the way through the 1970s, and very similarly to Whistle and I'll Come to You, most of them were based on stories by the classic ghostwriter M.R. James. So next week, I'm going to be joined by an academic and scholar, somebody who knows everything there is to know about M.R. James, Ren Zelen. Fantastic name. She's going to give us a bit of background info about M.R. James. She's going to tell us all about him, his stories, his themes, just why he's one of the most influential horror writers of all time. And then in the second half of the podcast, I'm going to be joined by my good friend Michael Blythe, and we are going to be discussing the TV adaptation of Whistle and I'll Come to You. Not only that, we're then going to briefly run through all of the other BBC ghost stories in less detail, so they won't be sort of spoilerific, they'll just be briefly mentioned, but we'll be talking about some of the other classics such as Lost Hearts, The Ash Tree, and A Warning to the Curious. Then we're going to finish with an in-depth review of another one of the most iconic and influential TV ghost stories from the 1970s, written by the brilliant Nigel Neal, and that is called The Stone Tape. Now, I'm well aware that obviously these are a little bit more obscure than some of the films we've covered before on the podcast, and a lot of you out there, especially international listeners, may not have seen these. But both Whistle and I'll Come to You and The Stone Tape you can order off Amazon, and they are both available in pretty good quality on YouTube, so you can actually stream them for free. So I would hugely recommend watching those two, and if you get time, any of the other BBC ghost stories, because they're all fantastic. Cannot wait. So that's what we're going to be getting into in depth next week. So join us then for all of this and more on the evolution of horror.